Hey everybody, it's Jesse and I'm back again for another installment of Social School. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving and you were able to enjoy your break. I know mine was awesome, but I'm ready to get back at it. And so what we're planning on doing for today, I'm going to pick up where I left off last week and we're going to talk about cognitive distortions, or basically the stinking thinking, the little lies that we tell ourselves that cause stress or lead to stress. And so over the next couple lessons, we're going to deal with those cognitive distortions, talk about what it is that we can do to deal with them, and then hopefully wrap up this stress management lesson before it's Christmas break. So anyway, if you missed the video last time, I went through the top 5 or the first 5 of 10 of the cognitive distortions that we were dealing with. We talked about all or nothing thinking, mental filter, disqualifying the positive. We dealt with mind reading and fortune telling. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through number 5 through 10 on our list of the top 10 cognitive distortions, and we'll see if we can't find ourselves somewhere on that list. 6 through 10 of my top 10 cognitive distortions. We're going to look at things like doomsaying, focusing on the worst possible outcome, however unlikely; emotional reasoning, thinking that is based on feelings rather than what is real; should statements, thinking about what should be rather than what is known to be true; labeling, describing people or events merely by naming them rather than looking at the whole picture or the whole thing; and then the last one, blame, assuming you or others directly cause things when that may not be the case. For those of us who deal with anxiety, doomsaying should be pretty familiar to you. Maybe you get in trouble at work and so you think that you're going to get fired, or you're just focused on that worst possible outcome. Or if you don't do so well on a test or an assignment, you think that you're going to fail the class and you won't get any credit in that class, and maybe you won't get into a good college, and before you know it, that toilet bowl thinking leads us to think that we're going to end up homeless and never be able to get a good job or anything like that. And so doomsaying is definitely one of the most devastating of all of the cognitive distortions. And I know that even somebody like myself who has been positive at times has been guilty of doomsaying. If you've ever had somebody who didn't show up or didn't get home at a certain time, and so you think that oh my God, something terrible's happened. Maybe they got in a car wreck. Maybe something really terrible happened. Then that's kind of when doomsaying rears its ugly head. I know that when I was little, I was a small child, and my mom used to work at Fairmount Park Racetrack, and she'd come home real late on the weekends. And every weekend I would stay up until Mom came home, and usually it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. And there was one morning or one night when I was, I don't know, probably about 9 years old, and I had stayed up watching the Three Stooges, but I fell asleep on the couch. And I didn't wake up until almost 4 in the morning. And when I did wake up, my mom wasn't home. And I'm like, oh my God, something terrible has happened. Maybe she got in a car wreck. Maybe, I don't know, but something really bad happened. I'm just sure of it. And I went and I woke up my dad, and I was just in an absolute frenzy. My mind went there. I'm like, Dad, Mom's been in a car accident. Something terrible happened. And sure enough, just a couple minutes after that, my mom walked in the door, and what was she holding? She was holding this tiny little kitten. And I'm like, oh my God, Mom, what happened? What happened? And she's like, oh yeah, I found this kitten in the parking lot, and it was just running around, and it took me a little while to catch it. And so here you go, Jesse, I brought you a kitten. Never in a million years in my mind would I have thought that that's what was going on. My mind automatically went to that worst possible outcome. I went from, having my mom dead, wrapped around a telephone pole or in a ditch or something, to actually getting a kitten. And what that shows is that our mind will trick us. That little devil on our shoulder will lie and say that, these terrible things are happening, or things are going to be so much worse than they really are. And we just need to be on the lookout for that, because that's the sort of thinking that really causes a lot of people unnecessary anxiety, unnecessary stress, and it just causes a lot more problems than we deserve. Number 7 on my list of top 10 cognitive distortions is something called emotional reasoning. And actually, emotional reasoning is kind of one of those cognitive distortions that sort of covers all the rest of them. And so what happens in emotional reasoning is that we have a feeling, and our feelings kind of override our rational thought or our rational brain. And it's any time that you think that what you feel is actually real when that may or may not be the case. The best way that I can sum this up is when our heart takes over our head and we start to think things that we feel are actually real, when our logical selves, know for a fact that it's probably not true. And many times I've had clients and students who have said just absolutely ridiculous things to me, and they really truly believe them. A really good example would be something like, everybody hates me, or if we think about these things logically, it is not possible that everybody hates you. When you say everybody hates you, that means 7.8 billion people not only know you, but they also hate you, and it's just not real. And the logic behind it is there is something to that. It might be that there are some people who don't like you, or that there are some people who don't necessarily care for who you are. I mean, even me, there are some people who just don't like me, and that's logical. But when I start saying things like everybody hates me and nobody likes me, then very clearly I am wrapped up in a cognitive distortion. I talk to clients about these sorts of things, and they'll say, nobody likes me, and I will frequently come back with, well, but I like you. And then they'll be like, well, yeah, but my parents pay you. And I'm like, well, then I guess your parents like you. And yeah, but they're my parents. And so what happens is our heart will kind of get involved in this cognitive distortion too. So it's not just our head that does this, it's our feelings too. Unfortunately, emotional reasoning is a very devastating cognitive distortion. And just to get dark for a minute, I'm pretty sure that emotional reasoning is the cause of suicide. People will think terrible, terrible things like, I can't live without him or her if they're dealing with a breakup, or things will never get better, nothing's ever going to change, all of these things. And if you look at those statements logically, there is no possible way that could be true. We can move on, we can learn, we can grow, things do get better, right? It's not all downhill. And if we think about this logically, then we can kind of burn through that emotional reasoning, but it's very, very hard to do by yourself. And that is why sometimes when you catch yourself in that emotional reasoning, it's really good to talk to somebody. Just let somebody know kind of what you're thinking or where you're at. And if you do that, then you have a real good chance of beating that emotional reasoning and coming to a better understanding of what's probably going on with you. All right, number 8 on my list of the top 10 cognitive distortions are something called should statements, or what I refer to as shoulding on yourself or shoulding on others. And notice I said should, but there's a reason why I make that little joke. I think that this should statements happen when we beat ourselves up or we beat other people up based on what we think that they should be like or how they should act. When that is not necessarily the case. And thinking about the way that you should be or the way that other people should be, really there's not a lot of reality to that. There's not a lot of really worthwhile thinking that goes on, and the shoulds, the coulds, the woulds, there are not. If you are one of those people who struggles with self-esteem, then you are probably no stranger to these should statements. We beat ourselves up. I should have gotten a better grade. I should have gotten a better job, or whatever it is. And these shoulds they really aren't real. There's nothing to this. And sometimes we should on other people too. I ask in the classroom, I ask a lot of young ladies that are your age, don't you think that guys your age should be more mature? And they're like, oh yeah, these guys, they're like 18 years old and they still think farts are funny. I'm like, what? Wait, hold on, I'm 48 years old and I still think farts are funny. And so, even if you think that, your coworkers should do a better job or they should be more responsible or whatever it is that you think about other people, and how they should be, it's just not real. And a lot of times it's not our place to judge, but we do judge others. And shoulds come in when we judge others, but oftentimes we judge ourselves. And in all fairness, we come by this honestly. Your teachers are constantly telling you what you should do. Your parents are telling you, how you should act. You should get a job. You should clean your room. You should do this or that. And the thing is that it's not really helpful. It's not really positive. But when we do this to ourselves, that's when should statements are at their worst. When you beat yourself up over how you think you should be. One time, I'll tell you, I had a doctor who told me that I should weigh 180 pounds. And the truth of that matter is I haven't weighed less than 180 pounds since like the 4th or 5th grade. And if I can't be happy unless I weigh what a doctor says I should weigh, then I may not ever be happy again. And that should statement is causing a lot of stress. And it hurts when it comes from other people, but it's at its very worst when we do it to ourselves. Number 9 on my list of the top 10 cognitive distortions is something called labeling. And we are guilty of labeling when we think that we can describe other people simply by naming them rather than looking at the whole picture or who they really are. And so these labels happen anytime we think, oh, that guy is a douchebag or that girl is a B. If you've ever, kind of used those labels to describe somebody and think that just because you know who they really are. And labels cause so many problems in human interactions. I think that if you guys think about the kind of cliques that happen a lot in high school, you can kind of see where these labels kind of come into play. Back in my day, when I was in high school, there were like the jocks, the preps, the stoners, the metalheads, those kind of things. And those labels that we put on other people really, really don't describe them. And this causes so many problems in human interaction. If I have a prejudice against, my female boss and I think, oh, she's just being a B, then that definitely affects, how I'm going to interact with her, how I'm going to treat her. And by putting that label on her, first of all, I've lied to myself because that's not who she really is. That person has a name. But also I've caused myself to have an attitude about her and not really look at who she really is. And these labels cause a lot of problems when we put them on other people, but they also cause a lot of problems when we put them on ourselves. Somebody might think, oh, I'm a loser. Wait, I got to do that the other way. I'm a loser. And just because, they're not as good as somebody else or whatever, they start to think that, that's who they really are, when really they're just a human being just like everybody else. And when we use these labels to try to explain other people or their behavior or what they do, then we're not really seeing the whole person or the whole picture. And labeling causes problems in racism, in sexism, in ageism. I know that I have been guilty of being called a boomer before. And the truth of the matter is I'm actually too young for that. So even though I look like an old dude, I'm not old enough to be a boomer. But I've been labeled that, and I could take that label and I could put it on myself. But that's really just causing a lot more problems than I really deserve or than I really need. Number 10 on my list of the top 10 cognitive distortions is blame. And here I'm setting up myself up for, some of the things that we're going to talk about in the upcoming lessons. But blame basically happens when you assume that you or others directly cause things when that may or may not be the case. And the problem with blame is that if you think that your problems are someone else's fault, it's your boss's fault, it's your coworker's fault, that you got in trouble, or it's your teacher who's messing you over, then really there's not a lot that you can do about it, right? There's no way to sort of fix that problem. And so blame is one of those cognitive distortions that causes lots and lots of problems for people. And it causes a lot of stress that really, it is perfectly normal and natural for us to want to blame other people for the things that go wrong in our life, right? Because if it's somebody else's fault, then I don't have to take responsibility. But whether, the things that go wrong in your life are somebody else's fault or not, in the end, there's only one person who really that you have control over, and that person is yourself. And so by blaming others, saying that it's this person's fault or that person's fault, you really put yourself in a difficult situation. And I had a student one time who ended up losing her job. She was a hostess at a restaurant, and there was a customer that just got completely ignorant with her, and they started cussing each other out back and forth, and she ended up losing her job. And when we talked about it in class, she said, oh yeah, it was that bee's fault because she shouldn't have got ignorant with me. And the thing is, whether, it really is someone else's fault or not, when we blame other people, we cause ourselves a lot of problems because you're never going to be able to change that person. And so we have to kind of, as young adults or young future adults, we have to start to take some responsibility. Now, the problem that sometimes happens with that taking responsibility is there is another side to this blame thing, and that is called personalization. And so in personalization, what people do is they blame themselves for things that may or may not be their fault. A real good example of that is that I have had clients before who were children of divorce, and they, as 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, were blaming themselves for their parents' divorce. And really, again, that's emotional reasoning, because logically it doesn't make sense, right? It should not be possible for an 8-year-old kid to cause their parents to get divorced. And people kind of take that on themselves. And just like some of the others, when we turn these cognitive distortions on ourselves, things get a lot worse than they really are. And even though things don't make sense, they feel real to us. And so when we take blame that isn't necessarily ours, then we're hurting ourselves. And we really don't have to do that. We really shouldn't have to do that. So there you have it, everybody. That is number 6 through 10 of my top 10 cognitive distortions. And just to be clear, there are many more, and for most of us, we are guilty of all of those cognitive distortions and more. But what I want you to think about over the course of the next week or so is how is your thinking causing or leading to your stress? And I'll be real honest, I did kind of wanted to get into the solutions or what we do about these things. But it looks like I'm out of time for today. But I want to thank everybody for showing up and watching. As always, hopefully you can get my contact information from your teacher. But I really appreciate you showing up and watching this video, and I'll see everybody next week.